Hi, everyone. My name's Ken Thursby, and I'm going to start us off with the EPI use case. Let's start with an introduction. EPI stands for Electronic Product Information, and today we just have plain old product information. It's typically a paper leaflet, which goes inside a carton for a pharmaceutical product. And as an industry, we use billions of these every year. The leaflets themselves are very valuable. They provide information about the product, like ingredients, things like how to report adverse effects, and how to take your medicine safely. And not surprisingly, they're a closely regulated document, and they need to be updated as required over the product life cycle. Just in case you're really not sure about what a leaflet is, there's a picture on the right-hand side there, which shows a leaflet to scale. There's actually a human being behind that. You can just see the tops of the heads and the hands. So these documents are pretty big. They can have lots of text on, which can be difficult to search. And the readability is a problem, especially for multilingual packs where you have different languages. If the product is updated, of course, a paper leaflet isn't instantly updated. That needs to come through production and the supply chain, so that can limit the availability of the latest information. They're costly to produce, not just the materials, but also the processes that require the leaflets to be printed, folded, put in cartons, and distributed. And not to mention, there's an environmental impact of a single-use bit of paper that goes in the bin. So, what about e-product information? That's not a new idea. It's been around for at least a decade. There's plenty of challenges with a paradigm shift like this, moving from paper to electronic. It's not something that's brand new. Other industries have done it. But one of the challenges we have in the healthcare business is that issue of trust. And we need to have a method where patients can access the content. And those key issues of technology could be addressed by blockchain. So the question I'd like to ask you is, can blockchain help realize the promise of EPI? And a little bit later on, you'll get that question through the Slido. So have a think as we go through the webinar. So what does the current situation look like? In the diagram at the top there, you can see the life cycle of a leaflet. It starts with the manufacturers. We have hundreds of those. In fact, about 2,500 MA holders in Europe alone for prescription products. They have to create the content and update it through its life. Then you have health authorities. They need to review and approve it before it can be published. Publishing with paper is simply printing it, putting it in a pack, and dissemination or access is a patient reading that leaflet. All of that will require change if you move to an electronic version. The good news is change is happening. Health authorities are opening up to the idea, and leading health authorities want to move from paper to EPI together with manufacturers. The European Medicines Agency have issued guidance to the industry with these 10 principles you can see there on the bottom right. But there's no digital solution yet. We've seen some national pilots. They've emerged, but they typically focus on this back end, the publishing and access piece, putting EPI on a phone. But we see this end-to-end approach across the life cycle being the way to make the change happen and make it stick, where benefits occur to all ecosystem players.
Ken, thanks very much for the introduction to EPI. I would just like to take people through the future vision. We will still have the three main players. We have the health authorities, the manufacturers, and the healthcare practitioners and the patients. And in today's world, we essentially have a silo type system, but we wish to address that and have them connected on the transactional infrastructure where everybody's connected essentially. We will take the example of the EPI. We wish to create the document in the form that it will be disseminated or consumed in. In order to do so, we need to have a review and approval cycle with the health authority. So the document will be shared with the health authorities, and we will enter into the review and approval cycle. At some point, we will agree then that the document is approved. So at this point in time, we have an approved document. Now, as we make updates over the life cycle of the product, we will have different versions of the leaflet. So at this point in time, we have this approved document now available to us. Now, from a patient perspective, we need to consider how to get access to this. So let's take the example of a phone. So we need to keep this as simple as possible for the patient. So we don't want to applications for each different manufacturer. So the same application needs to work for all manufacturers. With that in mind, we have created the PharmaLedger app. So the next question becomes, how do we get access to the leaflet? What do we need to do? What do we need to scan? With serialization, we have a data matrix code on the pack. And in the data matrix code, we have a lot of information. We have the GTIN, the serial number, the batch number, and the expiration date. So we would essentially scan this code on our phone. So the next question becomes, how do we know where to go to get the leaflet? Do we go? And with that, we have this resolver. So the resolver will essentially determine who should provide the leaflet to the patient. So the resolver then will resolve to the correct location, and we return the leaflet to the patient on their phone. You will see there's a lot of features on this, and these are for anti-counterfeiting, which Dan will and Alberto will address later on. So to get access to the leaflet, you will press the product information button, and we will display the approved document. Now, the question becomes to the patient, what gets displayed? Do we display the PDF on glass, or do we display a more patient-friendly version on our phones or on the device? So thus far, we've just been speaking about getting a leaflet on a phone, and that is, we could do so via QR code, etc. However, we're looking at building on additional use cases. Now, imagine the scenario where this batch was subject to a recall. So the patient scans the batch or scans the data matrix code, it resolves back, and we get returned a message to say that this batch is subject to a recall, or it could be that it might warn from an anti-counterfeit perspective that this serial number is unknown to the manufacturer, etc. Okay. So we're addressing the review and approval portion of this, and also the dissemination component of this. We introduced previously what we call the digital key, which is essentially the data matrix code. And as you can see here, there's a lot of information that we can use here. We have the GTIN, the lot number, the expiration date, and the serial number. Now for EPI, we are planning on using the GTIN and the lot number essentially first. But for other use cases, they would be using the unique serial number and potentially even the expiration date. Ken, do you have anything else to add in here?
The thing I would point out on this slide is the digital key is used across the value chain, right from the manufacturing plant all to the patient. So you get a sense of the multi-use cases that you can have by using this digital key.
This has been our journey so far for EPI, and essentially also for an end result for a blockchain-enabled healthcare system at some point in the future. We started earlier on this year in 2020 with our user stories, our agile development, and our prototype target for the end of the year for EPI. The next milestone would be in 2021 to run an EPI pilot. Then after that, building upon that, to build in the EPI review and approval process. And at this point in time, we get some value capture in terms of EPI lifecycle reviews and improved patient safety access to information. And then building on that again, we would build in additional use cases such as recall functionality, product verification, and potentially build in the paper inserts or the paper leaflet removal from the packs. And at that point in time, then we get additional value capture in terms of we're expanding beyond the PharmaLedger initiative. We have the recall functionality. We approve access to label changes. And from the manufacturer's perspective, we have both environmental and cost benefits. Ken, would you like to speak to how we got so far in 2020 with all the user stories and the remote work and how that was for us?
Yeah, it is worth mentioning. With blockchain, it has had a lot of hype. It's been somewhat of a buzzword as people grapple with what it could do. in the industry, and we're actually doing it. We're taking action. So it took us from June to the end of August to do our user stories, 35 user stories created, over 20 hours of workshops, which were all done remotely, with 40 individuals from across the consortium taking part. So it's quite an effort to get there. We prioritized 13 of those user stories into our first prototype. And that's what the team's working on now. Just last week, we've seen the first demo, very, very exciting. And our target is to have that first prototype ready by the end of the year as an early Christmas present. So very, very exciting time. It's happening and it's looking very, very real now. So, yeah, the journey has well and truly commenced. Okay, so let's just take a look at the stakeholders and the value proposition for EPI. What you can see on this slide in front of you right now is there's many different stakeholder groups. And one of the cool things about this use case for EPI is every one of those stakeholder groups seeks to get a benefit from EPI. So in terms of making the paradigm shift going from paper to electronic, because everyone benefits, there's plenty of incentive to make the change. So rather than talk about all of these, I'm just going to pick out a couple of favorites. Mine is in the patient groups, this faster availability of breakthrough medicines. Let's say you've got a cancer product which gets an approval for a new indication, say brain cancer. It was previously a lung cancer drug. If you're a patient with brain cancer and that latest indication can get out to practitioners instantly, then that could be life-saving. So I think that's a huge, huge benefit. Patrick, I know you've got a favorite on here. What's yours?
Thanks, Ken. My one would be the environmental perspective. When we look at the amount of carbon emissions and the amount of paper that we use, it's a phenomenal amount. Putting aside the financial impacts of this, the environmental impacts of what we're doing currently today is huge to us. So I would pick out the environmental one personally. Thanks.
So now to the audience, we'd like to ask you, using Slido, what do you think the greatest value proposition is for EPI? You'll find on Slido, you've got a list of all of these. Pick your favorites and let's see what the outcome is when we get into the discussion. Okay, so when we look at building the future with a connected healthcare system, we can see that EPI is one use case. You could build EPI as a use case with other technology, but the benefit of blockchain is it allows layering in of additional use cases and value towards this blockchain-enabled healthcare value chain. So all these use cases layering on top of each other add more value to the ecosystem players. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about another one of these use cases that can be layered in, which is the anti-counterfeit check.
The first question, which was most popularly voted, is what's the status of the projects? When do they go live? And is this only for the EU market or is it global? Okay.
The last part of that question, from the industry perspective, definitely all of the companies, the beneficiaries, members of the consortium are global players. They're marketing products around the world. And as Jan presented in his presentation, these supply chains are quite complex and extend over multiple geographies. So the intention is that while these solutions are designed within the EU market, that they could potentially be scaled to other markets in the future. And of course, that's really important for a blockchain solution, because the real value comes from scaling it to to a network And the more participants that are engaged in it, the more value that's created. In terms of the status, I mean, just to emphasize, PharmaLedger is an innovation and research project, and it is its stated intention is to do a reference implementation in a pre-productive environment. That said, as Ken and Patrick mentioned with EPI, we've also chosen to accelerate some of these projects and to create a productive version well before the end of the project. So we're hoping that we can meet and exceed the stated objectives of PharmaLedger by creating solutions that can already create value as soon as possible. And so that's our intention. And I think basically we intend to keep you updated on the status of this as we go forward through the regular newsletters or our pharmaledger.eu website. So I would, if you're not signed up for the newsletters, I think that's a great way to stay abreast on what the current status of the projects are. It's very dynamic. A lot of things are changing, of course, and that's where you can get the latest information.
Our next question is, I think, for Patrick and Ken, and it relates to patient information. How would patients get access to the information who are not using smartphones, tablets, or other devices like this? Yeah.
Perfect. So it's a great question. And the way I would like to answer this, if you imagine paradigm shifts like this in the past, let's say going from analog radio to digital radio, that didn't happen in one step. It happens over lots of small steps over time. So you have a situation where analog and digital is coexisting until you get to the point where everybody's got the devices for full digital. And we think EPI is going to be similar. There's going to be a situation where they're both coexisting. It might be that you start with healthcare practitioner administered products first, because it's most likely that these particular users are going to have access to a device, whereas not all patients are going to have access to a device. And as long as there's one which doesn't have an iPhone or another device to scan, then you've got to cater for them. So over time, as trends change, we would expect most people to have devices. We probably still need to allow for some method for somebody who doesn't have a device to get a leaflet. And we've seen examples in Germany where they've got a leading non-blockchain solution where they have a feature for dispensers to actually print a leaflet if it's needed. So much like we had the transitions with banks, you know, once upon a time, everyone used to get their statements printed and delivered through the letterbox. Now, many people get their statements online. We see a similar transition over time.
And I guess we'll pick up the other question here, which is about the 2D data matrix requiring a special scanner, or can this be accessed by the public via smartphone? You pick up on that one as well.
Ken, I can take this one. Sorry, this is Patrick here. Yes, we would scan it from your smartphone. It's not like a QR code in terms of you just point your camera at it. So you would need an app to right now to scan the barcodes. And there's plenty of apps actually out there currently that you can use to scan a barcode and read the content.
Super. Okay. Can we define and customize what information will be made available to different parties? Would imagine that not all information will be relevant to all people. I guess that's for you two again.
Is this directly for EPI?
Yes, I think this was related to EPI. Yes.
Well, one of the cool things about the modern digital content is having the ability to structure data, and that opens up things like a search bar, search functions. If you remember that picture of the EPI on paper, you've really got to do a lot of scanning to find the information. So, yeah,
this is going to push us into the realm of standardizing content, which again is another challenge that we need to overcome in order for this to be widely adopted. But that's the kind of things we're leaning into, having discussions with other key players. For example, the Inter-Association Task Force for Electronic Patient Information, as we roll out our prototypes to get broader feedback. We'll be asking patient groups about what's important to them. So, yeah, plenty of opportunity.
Okay, lovely, thank you. The next question I think is for Patrick and Ken again. The electronic leaflet is a useful functionality which can also be provided without blockchain. So what are the benefits of using blockchain in this use case?
Okay, Ken, I can take this one. If we were simply looking at putting a leaflet on a phone, then we could do it with a QR code, for example, and that is done across the world in many places. One of the issues with doing so is you're essentially legitimizing fake medicines because it can be easily copied. You'll go to a location and you'll return back a leaflet. What we're looking at is we're building EPI and then building all additional use case on top of that. So like the anti-counterfeit stuff that Dan had mentioned. So again, if it was just about a leaflet on a phone, then you're absolutely correct. You wouldn't even be going down the blockchain direction with this. Does that?
I could maybe add a couple of things to that. One of the big advantages, I think, of blockchain is it's a decentralized solution, as opposed to having a central database where you've got to convert Word documents into structured data and put them on to a website. So you do away with that intermediary, number one. Number two, you've got a scalable solution. Remember, just in Europe alone, 2,500 MA holders for prescription drugs with hundreds, if not thousands of products. It's a lot to manage. So to share that burden across the ecosystem players where it's best placed is an advantage, which leads into legal aspects. If we today, the MAH, the marketing authorization holder, is responsible for delivering sufficient instructions for the product, and that's to do with product liability. Today, we're responsible for that, and we put a paper leaflet in a pack. If in the future we aren't doing that directly, if it's through a third party, an intermediary, we don't think that's a good thing. There's a mismatch between who's liable, who's accountable, and who's responsible. And for something so important as patient information, we think that should be with the marketing authorization holder. And last but not least is the trusted and secure nature of blockchain. We see so much fake news. We see so much by the way of digital crime, where you can't be sure whether something's right or not, even for people that have been around for a while, you know, who are more attuned to picking up on false information. It's too easy for patients to get misleading information which isn't direct from the source. So you can use blockchain to use the interoperability. So we get the EPI direct from the MAH system of record, so it's trusted and secure. I mean, they're just a couple off the top of my head, but the blockchain really does have a lot of good features. Is it the best out of all the solutions? Time will tell. We need to develop these prototypes and ask these questions like you've just asked there, and challenge ourselves and make sure that it's delivering value over and above the other solutions.
I would just add, because I'm reading down a further comment about, sorry, Martin, I'm just jumping ahead, would blockchain allow outdated leaflets? What we're looking at here is the concept of batch-specific EPIs. This was identified by the EMA, HMA, and the EC back in November of 2018, I believe. So we're looking to address that question as well.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is Patrick and Ken, from an e-leaflet point of view, what would you say the greatest benefit to the regulatory agency is?
I would say there's a few. The first one has to be around efficiency. The regulators have got a tough job with so many different products on the market, maintaining those dossiers and compliance to make sure patients are safe. That's a lot of work. And as the whole industry transforms into the digital era, they've got a massive paradigm shift to go through themselves, where you've got lots of processes and systems which originated in paper form, which are rather clunky today. So I think we've got an opportunity using the blockchain and smart contracts to transact across the ecosystem, manufacturers to health authorities, to smooth those transactions. In the example of e-leaflet, we have the creation, review and approval cycles, which are carried out in between electronic systems and using emails. That can definitely be improved. So we want to experiment with that, with the use of the smart contracts. I would say, actually, that is the number one. I think that is the number one thing. It's enabling the digital transformation for regulators, making it easier for them.
The other piece is coming back to the traceability piece is that we are very fast in reacting to potential threats on the product quality, which might be indicated from the regulators. So all the question about recalls is another aspect that can be improved, making use of blockchain in the ecosystem.
The next question is 10 years a realistic timeline? The tech evolves way faster. What are the hurdles to completing it in 2 years? So I guess that could be for any of our panelists.
It's Ken Thursby here. We talked about 10 years. I'm not sure whether it's a misunderstanding. So the idea for EPI was 10 years old, but it's an idea that hasn't come to fruition. And one of the reasons for that was not having the technology. But the other part of the question, the bit I really like in it, is can we do more faster? And Patrick and I were absolutely cut from the same cloth when it comes to action. One of the tough things about blockchain is people just don't understand it. It's too conceptual and too new. It's like 20 years ago when people were talking about the internet. People didn't understand what it could do and how it could be used or how it worked. And it was very, very difficult. So we love the idea of action. We're using the agile methodology to develop the prototypes. So that 2-year challenge that you put down there in the question, challenge accepted.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I guess this next question is also for you guys. How would a patient know where to download the mobile application, and how is the application download rate in pilot program?
Okay, and I can maybe take a first look at this one. That's a really good question. And the other obvious question is, how would they know where to scan? How would the patient know they need to scan the data matrix code? So there's a lot of these questions that we don't have answers for at the moment. Just from that perspective, as to how do we get it out there that you would scan the data matrix code? It may not be, it's quite obvious to perhaps myself or Ken or others who are working in this field, but for others out there, it's not that obvious. And regarding a pilot, we are in the development stage right now, so we haven't actually started a pilot, so we don't know of that. But Ken, do you have any info from the any other ones across the world in terms of downloading apps, etc.?
Yeah, so the app is an interesting one. So obviously with any paradigm shift like this, there's going to have to be a change of behaviors. So instead of opening a pack and finding a folded leaflet there, people are going to have to get used to scanning. We would need to work out how to deploy that in the best way. We're thinking of starting with healthcare practitioners because this is a smaller user group and we can get direct feedback about how it's working. But maybe the artwork on the pack would change, to encourage people to scan. Like when QR codes first come out, it always said scan here for information, whereas now we see a lot of behaviors around the world where people see a QR code and know that they need to scan it. You don't need to tell them. And that's prevalent now with COVID, with track and trace systems. You see these QR codes everywhere. And of course, to us on the project, we know the difference between a 2D code and a QR code because we're barcode nerds, right? But the majority of the public just sees a black and white hashed square. So I think we've got an opportunity to use the adoption behavior changes through COVID to maybe help patients understand the power of this digital key and start using it. But for sure, that's going to be one of our adoption challenges.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question says, I assume a big value could also be that the system would allow for more detailed pharmacovigilance. Is this correct? I don't know who would like to take that one.
Short answer, yes. So just take a verse effects, right? If you're taking a product and something has happened, through an electronic leaflet, you would be able to find the section for reporting adverse effects or for reading up on it about what to do, and then click a link directly to report it, which would be very, very much faster. And then let's not forget about the data analytics side of things. Let's say you've got a product out there in clinical trials, and I mean, this is really fast forwarding and opening it up, but you could be asking the person on the clinical trial to report things real time, and that's going to allow compression of the time it takes to get insights back from clinical trials. So lots of opportunities with pharmacovigilance.
I think our next question regarding whether these solutions have been implemented or they're ongoing projects, I think Dan answered that with a question earlier on that this is an ongoing project. So if it's okay, unless anyone has anything to add to that, I'll move on to the next question, which is the benefits of the two-day matrix. It's already there due to sterilization. If other codes were added to the pack, it would start to get very confusing for patients. So Patrick and Ken, what's your response to the issue of confusion for patients with the number of codes on packs?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, yeah, it's true. I mean, we don't want to have multiple codes on the pack. And while we are talking about, and we showed the presentation on a data matrix code, and that had a lot of information in there. I mean, there's a lot of OTC products in Europe that are not serialized. So we have the solution can also be used to get a leaflet for those now, but with limited checks, because you only have an EAN 13 code on the packs already. So we're also looking in that area, but adding additional codes on is far from ideal from a confusion perspective. Okay.
I would add to that as well. I think the observation is spot on. If you imagine a family member as a patient with multiple barcodes, not knowing what to scan, the idea of having one digital key is a concept which we like a lot. And this is the concept of the bundled value that blockchain can bring. If you can use that one digital key, that 2D data matrix code, and you can use the same code for giving a recall message, you can use the same code for stock keeping in a pharmacy, you can use the same code to give a signal that one unit has been dispensed for finished goods traceability, you can use the same code for recall and EPI. I mean, the list goes on. So that multi-use of one code as a global standard, GS1 is driving the agenda for standardization across our industry. You could see in 5 years, 10 years time that converging, and the 2D data matrix in our view is the best candidate for a global standard right now, because it's so well used in Europe already with serialization, and with serialized volume being about 90% of global volume from major pharma companies, it's probably the best horse to back at this moment in time. So yeah, one code to do it all? We hope so, but time will tell.
Thank you. The next question was also asked during your presentation, which underlying technology are you currently exploring? And are you in communication with regulatory agencies? And if so, what's their feedback about this approach?
So, yeah, to answer that question about the regulators, obviously for EPI in particular, the regulators are one of the major players, one of the ecosystem players. And the review and approval process is one that manufacturers and health authorities share. So collaborating for this, for the paradigm shift to e-leaflet, it is going to have to be done, because that way of doing things is built around paper today. So we're seeing some leading health authorities in the world. We're seeing the European Medicines Agency, for example, and the Health Authority in Singapore putting out guidelines about how to interact. For Pharma Ledger, our first interaction will be with our pilot country. So we're in the early stages of discussing building on the GI 4.0 pilot, which is a German pilot for e-leaflet. It's not blockchain, and it's only focused on the back end of the process, that is putting a leaflet on a phone. So we want to open up that discussion about how we could improve the GI 4.0 pilot by layering in blockchain. So we're trying to, it's actually a very difficult space to navigate, because there's lots of different industry bodies. For example, the Inter-Association Task Force for e-leaflet exists, which has Medicines for Europe and FPA, plus the consumer products arm, all with a voice, all wanting to engage with health authorities. So we're having to navigate that complex landscape to do it in a way which is going to suit the health authorities and allow for a proper collaboration. So the short answer is yes, we need to engage them, and we've started that journey.
Super, thank you, Ken. Our next question is, will this EPI system be effective for all medicinal products within the EU, or only for products registered via a centralized procedure? Who'd like to pick that one up?
Ken, I can take that one if that's okay. If we look at just the dissemination part of literally scanning it and putting it on, then it doesn't actually matter which procedure was used. It's the review and approval cycle that we would need to look at there. Now, the initial one that we will probably look at will be the centralized procedure, but the intention would be to look at the remaining procedures in Europe as well.
Super, thank you. And the next question was to what extent will EPI leverage the GS1 digital link standard?
I can take that one again, I guess. Right now, we're not looking at the for the initial minimum viable product. We're not looking at the GS1 digital link as part of the initial solution, but it will be looked at as we look forward, as we build upon this initial app and the initial solution, because we are conscious that it exists and many are using it, and we need to figure out how we can embed that in there, because it will help with adoption.
Sure. And there's the next question was whether EPI is a released app, and will it effectively replace eLabel, which is the current solution?
Right now, sorry again. Right now, it's not. We're only in the initial stages of producing the minimum viable product. The intention will be to run a pilot at some point in next year. So as of right now, it's not a released app.
I would add to that as well the existing portal for a leaflet. That's available today. You can get an e-leaflet on the web. It's typically the latest version, but the problem with that is it always points you back to the paper leaflet in the pack. The reason for this is because different batches of the same product can have different ingredients, like where there's a CMC change. For example, if you change cornstarch to lactose in a product, you could have both versions of the product on the market, but one has lactose in. And if you're lactose intolerant, you need to know that. So we're thinking that using the 2D code, you can offer a leaflet based on the batch and the GTIN number. So much like with the BBC News today, there isn't a version of the news like a 2 a.m. edition like there used to be with newspapers. That's gone now. You just have the news, which is the latest and correct news at that particular time. So there's some concepts there which we'll explore in the first prototypes to see how they could be done. And we think overcoming those liability issues of the current state, that is an electronic leaflet that might not be correct, that really forces us down the paper route for liability and patient safety. But if we can overcome that with an electronic method, then perhaps that's enough to knock that barrier down so we can go paperless.
Thank you. And the next question is about the plan to implement this in stages, Dan. I don't know if we've kind of touched on that, or do you want to expand? It's asking whether or not it would be a good idea to try something similar like EPI first. Or Patrick, yeah?
Yeah, that is actually the plan. So we start off with EPI because in theory it's the easier use case in theory. And then we build upon that. So we try and prove it out, because if we were just going to look at EPI, we wouldn't be looking at blockchain per se. We could do it maybe in other ways, but because of the whole ability, I think Ken showed it one of the slides there, we want to layer upon these different use cases. So, and Dan mentioned as well that the anti-counterfeiting would be built upon the EPI.
Sure. Patrick, the next question is, I think, is for you guys. It's the 2D code for parallel importing. Will the 2D data matrix code point to the right insert?
Yeah, under FMD, a parallel importer or trader is considered a manufacturer. So they as the manufacturer they would create the UI or the data matrix code, which their a new GTIN or NTIN or whatever will be, and they will put their batch number potentially and serial numbers. So they would then, it will be the same as a manufacturer doing it. And when that code would be scanned, if they have enabled it, they would then the patient would get the leaflet.
Super, thank you. Next question is probably for Patrick and Ken. To what extent is EPCIS an open GS1 and ISO standard used for the data model and capture query interfaces to ensure interoperability across all stakeholders?
I think this one is maybe more related to the product tracking use case. When I look at that question, because you're going to be exchanging data between different partners. When I look at that question, for in the case of EPI, particularly for the dissemination part, we would not be using EPCIS. It's not required for that. It may be something that could be explored when we're looking at the review and approval process, but that is on its very early stages. So perhaps somebody from the traceability team may be able to answer that a bit better than I can.
Okay, super. Thanks, Dan. A question probably for Patrick and Ken. Is the reason that we do not have EPI yet really that a platform such as blockchain is missing? Isn't the problem much more on the open regulatory questions?
Yeah, yes, that is correct. And the EMA and the HMA issued the 10 key principles back in January or February of this year. But that is the case. I mean, we could have EPI but you will still have your paper. And the thing with what we're proposing here is we would like to have a system that potentially allows the removal of paper at some point in the future. It's about building the infrastructure, the processes, and the technology that would allow that to happen. Yeah, but we now have we're obviously much more advanced from, I think some people may recall the PIM project from many, many years ago. So things have changed a lot since then. But yeah, the technology alone is not going to solve this. You will need the open regulatory aspects. Ken, maybe you can add to that as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. There are always challenges to a paradigm shift. Technology is just one of them. There's the political will. We're seeing that from leading health authorities. We're also seeing will from national regulators. There's a number of national level pilots going on right now, which are struggling. It's early doors, they're making progress, but can we accelerate it with a common technology platform? We think so. There are other challenges as well. If you think about the analog to digital transformation for radio, for example, that wasn't done in one step. You had that done in multiple steps where, in fact, the analog and digital coexisted for a while until you got that broad-based adoption to the digital side. So we're under no illusions that this is going to be like a flick of a switch turning on the Christmas lights. It's going to be more of a journey. And as we do these experimental prototypes, we're using agile methodology. So the idea is you define an experiment which has a relatively short time period. You run it, you get feedback, because one of the hardest things with blockchain is people just don't understand what it looks like. They can't see it, feel it, touch it. It's back-end wizardry. We need to demonstrate that to folks, get feedback, and then adapt the solution. So we think with that approach and a sound basis for the underlying technology, that could be the catalyst. But for sure, it's an exciting time. There's lots of things coming together all at once. The technology is just one piece. The political will is there as well.
Absolutely. And just touching on that, the next question is around the use of blockchain and the EPI use case. What is the infrastructure that's needed to be put in place in drug makers to enable the end-to-end workflow? So Ken, can you answer that one?
I can have a go at it. Perhaps Dan, you could chime in as well. So if we think about the e-leaflet solution, we would have to have the ability to put a 2D code on the packs. And thankfully, the industry's already invested millions of euros in this with machines that can do it. Certainly for the prescription drugs, the non-prescription drug makers like OTC, that's a different problem to solve because they won't have that asset. We see a number of APIs needed. For example, we need an API that pulls the serialization data from the current systems into the blockchain. We would need an API for the review and approval process with the health authorities, or an app to be decided. And with the infrastructure, we know that the blockchain infrastructure requires nodes to be hosted, and that needs to be figured out. What investment is needed for a node, and how will that work? The traditional stack itself, if you like, the platform, the middleware, and the app. The platform and the middleware is currently being built and experimented by with the PharmaLedger group. So that infrastructure would be there. Now, as to how that will work in a broader ecosystem when we move from the PharmaLedger research project into production, that needs to be figured out. And the apps is an interesting one. You know, the apps in the future, with such an interoperable system, sharing data and information, there's opportunities for people to build apps for applications, you know, for use cases we haven't even thought of yet. Much like the way we use the internet today compared to the way we used it 20 years ago. You know, it's those app developments are really like, you know, that's an open opportunity, which it's very difficult to put your finger on what that will look like. We'll let you use your imagination on that one. Dan, have you got anything to add to that?
No, just that the design of the architecture is work in progress. Where, you know, that's a key deliverable of our architecture work stream, and the idea is, or our theory is, that if there is a platform that's put into place, that and there's common capabilities around identity or off-chain storage and security that's associated with this platform, that the use cases will benefit from that and not have to recreate a whole technology stack each time they want to realize a new use case. That's, I think, so we're hoping that this is going to show that there's some synergies to be had on a common platform.
Yeah, and I would just like to add in here, I think the question also is pointing to the integration to the manufacturer's back-end systems, their systems of record, for example. All of that needs to be considered as well. And I think that's a lot of the question, because that is covering the whole end-to-end process.
Super, thank you. I'm very conscious of the time, so I'm going to just tackle one last question. Any questions that aren't going to be answered here live, we will endeavour to answer them via a blog post on our website and through our newsletters as well. So we'll try to make sure that there's answers for all of your questions. So the last question, it's sort of quite a wide one. Who's the owner of the blockchain in the Pharma Ledger project?
The Pharma Ledger project, Dan here, just to answer that, is has a governance work package, which is currently evaluating different governance models. We know that some entity or some consortium has to support and operate, or, you know, the solution or the platform beyond the life of the project. So that's part of the project that's in it, and the evaluation of the governance models is currently ongoing. The recommendation for that will happen in the near future.
Okay, super, thank you. Okay, I think we've taken all the questions we can in the time that we have available. Like I say, we'll try and endeavour to answer the others via the website and blog posts. So it remains for me to say thank you to all of our speakers for their excellent presentations today. I'd also like to thank everyone involved in the production of the webinar today. And I'd especially like to thank you, the audience, for your attendance and your participation today. The recording of this event will be available via the Pharma Ledger website very soon after. And as Dan encouraged you earlier, if you're not already signed up to the newsletters, then we'd encourage you to do that and visit the Pharma Ledger website to find the link to do that. Our next webinar is planned to be in February, early February of next year, and we look forward to seeing you all then. But for now, thank you for your participation. Have a great day.